The Grand Council chamber of Nexora gleamed like polished obsidian, its sweeping arches disappearing into the wisps of artificial clouds that perpetually drifted near the ceiling. Order, order in the council, High Counselor Vex's voice boomed through the chamber, his forearms raised in exasperation. We cannot all speak at once, even if some of us have multiple mouths, he added with a pointed glare at the hive mind representative. The emergency session had been called after the detection of something. Nobody quite knew what. And that was precisely why the chamber's typical decorum had devolved into what could only be described as an intergalactic shouting match. Representatives from 17 advanced civilizations, each claiming to be more advanced than the other were now acting like younglings fighting over the last sweet crystal. If you're quite finished, a new voice cut through the chaos. Every eye, sensory organ, and an electromagnetic receptor turned toward the entrance. Admiral Kraz stood there, his usually pristine uniform showing signs of a rushed journey. The light caught the patterns of iridescent scales along his neck, a sure sign of stress for his species. The signals we've detected, they're not random space noise, and they're certainly not from any known civilization. The chamber erupted again. Impossible, shouted one representative. We've mapped every sentient race within 50,000 light years. Kraz's laugh was sharp enough to cut steel. Apparently not, unless one of you would like to explain why we're picking up thousands of crude radio signals, all originating from a supposedly uninhabited spiral arm. He strode to the center platform, his tail twitching with barely contained agitation. Computer Display Sector 47B, Earth Observation. The holographic display flared to life, showing a blue-green planet that looked remarkably unremarkable. These beings, Kraz continued, call themselves humans. And before you dismiss them, yes, they're primitive. Yes, they're still using combustion engines and silicon-based computing. He paused for dramatic effect, knowing full well how his next words would land. And yes, they've gone from first powered flight to landing on their moon in less than 70 solar cycles. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hive mind representatives' multiple mouths hung open in shocked silence. But that's not the most interesting part, Kraz continued, enjoying the rare moment of complete attention. We've detected their first primitive probes leaving their solar system. Crude things, really. Barely more than metallic boxes with basic sensors. But here's the kicker. They built them over 40 cycles ago and never stopped launching them. There are hundreds, all carrying messages of peace and scientific curiosity. He snorted. At least that's what they want us to think. Science Director Mira, her crystalline form shimmering with excitement, finally spoke up. Admiral, surely you're not suggesting these humans pose any threat. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Centuries. Perhaps. Kraz manipulated the holographic display, showing a rapid progression of human technological advancement. But look at this. They went from horse-drawn carriages to spaceflight in 2 of their generations. From basic radio to quantum communication attempts in less than 1. Their rate of advancement is unprecedented. High Counselor Vex waved all 4 hands dismissively. So they're quick learners. What of it? They haven't even achieved faster than light travel. Yet, Kraz corrected. They haven't achieved it yet, but they're trying and failing and trying again. And each time they fail, they learn something new. They're not following the normal technological progression paths we're familiar with. They're improvising. The debate that followed was heated, to put it mildly. The collective mind of Rigel insisted on immediate containment. The Silicon consciousness suggested observation only. The energetic beings of Centauri always, the peaceful ones, proposed immediate first contact. You're all missing the point. Trace's tail slammed against the floor, the sound echoing through the chamber. These humans, they're different. They don't specialize like we do. They don't wait for perfect solutions. What's their phrase? Ah, yes, they throw things at the wall to see what sticks. And sometimes, what sticks changes everything. But the Council, in its infinite wisdom, note the sarcasm, decided that Earth posed no immediate concern. After all, what harm could a species that still used fossil fuels possibly do to civilizations that had mastered dark energy? They're not following our rules because they don't know them, and that makes them more dangerous than any enemy we've ever faced. As the Council adjourned, dismissing the human situation as a minor curiosity, the first signs were already appearing. Deep space sensors detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of the Sol system. Human probes, once content to drift aimlessly, began showing signs of course correction. And in research facilities across Earth, scientists were making the first breakthrough calculations that would lead to their own FDL drives. The void was no longer empty, and its new inhabitants. They were just getting started. Admiral Kraz, sir. You need to see this immediately. Intelligence Officer Thorne burst into the observation deck, his usual stoic demeanor shattered. The data pad in his trembling hands displayed readings that made absolutely no sense, at least by any conventional standards they knew. Kraz turned from the sprawling vista of space before him, his scales shifting from their usual azure to a concerned purple. Unless Earth has suddenly developed plasma weapons or enslaved a sun, I don't want to. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he scanned the data. They did what? Thorne swallowed hard, all three of his throat sacs pulsating nervously. They took one of our probes. The stealth one, the one that wasn't supposed to exist. The Admiral's scales flashed crimson. Impossible. That probe had quantum camouflage. It was literally undefined in space-time until observed by our specialized equipment. Well, Thorne's nervous chuckle would have been amusing in any other situation. They didn't just find it. They improved it. The next few moments involved a lot of what humans would call colorful language. Though in Nexaran, it was more like geometrically impossible descriptions of one's ancestry. When Kraz finally calmed down enough to speak coherently, his first words were, "Show me everything." The footage was remarkable. The humans had somehow detected the quantum fluctuations of the stealth probe using what appeared to be modified radio telescopes. Primitive technology by any standard. But instead of just observing it, they'd launched what looked like a simple satellite toward it. The probe's automated systems, programmed to recognize only advanced technology as a threat, had ignored the approaching primitive device. That was their first mistake. The simple satellite had deployed what could only be described as a net made of, was that metal? No, plastic? Some hybrid? The analysis was inconclusive. But whatever it was, it had completely disrupted the probe's quantum field. It's like throwing a blanket over a ghost, and somehow making it corporeal. They used mechanical means to capture quantum technology, Kraz muttered, half impressed, half horrified. That's not how any of this is supposed to work. It gets better, Sir Thorne continued, scrolling through the data, or worse, depending on your perspective. They didn't just capture it, they reverse-engineered parts of it. Not all of it, mind you. They're still centuries away from understanding the core technologies, but they adapted what they could understand. They're like technological, taking advanced concepts and finding crude but effective ways to replicate them. Kraz slumped into his gravity chair, his scales now a mottled mix of colors that reflected his conflicting emotions. The Council needs to know about this immediately. The emergency session that followed was predictably useless. High Counselor Vex, in his infinite wisdom, the dripping sarcasm here, declared the incident a fascinating but minor security breach. They're still using rockets to reach their own orbit, Vex proclaimed, his forearms gesturing dismissively. So they caught one probe. So they learned a few tricks. What's the worst that could happen? The worst. Kraz's voice was deadly quiet. Let me tell you about the worst. These humans, they don't think like us. We see a technology, we study it, we perfect it, we move on to the next logical step. They see technology and ask, what else can we do with this? They take advanced concepts and find primitive ways to make them work. It's like giving quantum mechanics to cave dwellers and watching them figure out how to make it work with sticks and stones. Science Director Myra, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. Admiral Kraz's concerns aren't entirely unfounded. Our latest observations show them testing crude versions of gravity manipulation technology. They're using principles they gleaned from our probe to modify their primitive electromagnetic systems. It's crude, and honestly shouldn't work at all. But somehow it does. The council chamber erupted into chaos once again. The hive mind representatives' multiple mouths all started arguing with each other, a sure sign of cognitive distress. The silicon consciousness representatives began calculating probability matrices, so complex they started smoking slightly. But it was the next piece of news that finally got their attention. Deep space sensors had detected something leaving the Sol system. Something big, something that shouldn't have been possible for at least another century of human development. They called it the Pioneer Star, a massive ship built from what appeared to be salvaged satellites, space station parts, and was that an old sports stadium as part of the hull? It wasn't elegant. It wasn't advanced. It looked like something a child would build from spare parts. But it was moving, and it was headed toward the nearest star system. "They're not ready," someone shouted in the council chamber. "They can't possibly be ready for interstellar travel." Kraz laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Ready? Of course they're not ready. But has that ever stopped humans before? Has anything ever stopped humans before?" The council finally voted to establish a containment protocol, to set up hidden barriers around human space, to subtly discourage their expansion until they were ready to join galactic society. As Kraz left the chamber, Thorn caught up with him, datapad clutched nervously in his hands. "Sir, we've intercepted some human communications. They're already discussing ways to detect and bypass any barriers we might set up. They don't even know we exist yet, but they're already planning how to defeat us." Kraz's scales shifted to a color that hadn't been seen on a Nexaran in generations, the deep gold of both fear and admiration. "Of course they are, Thorn. Of course they are. Because that's what humans do. They don't wait for permission. They don't wait until they're ready. They just do." As if to punctuate his words, another alert came through. The humans had just launched something new. Something that, according to all known laws of physics, shouldn't work at all. But it did, because humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, had a funny habit of doing the impossible, and they were just getting started. 50 years passed. 50 miserable, anxiety-filled years of watching humans do exactly what Admiral Kraz had warned. They would do whatever the hell they wanted. "You have to admit," Thorn said, his once vibrant scales now dulled with age, "there's something almost beautiful about their chaos." He and Kraz stood on the observation deck of the Nexaran flagship, watching the latest human impossibility unfold before them. "Beautiful." Kraz snorted, his own scales shimmering with a mix of amusement and concern. "Tell that to the containment fleet." "Oh wait, you can't, because the humans turned half their ships into what they're calling space hotels and the other half into—" "What was it again?" "Mobile entertainment centers, sir," Thorn replied, trying and failing to suppress his amusement. "Apparently, they called it Egas in space, the greatest military vessels in the Nexaran fleet, designed to subtly contain and redirect human expansion, had indeed suffered a fate worse than destruction. The humans had somehow, and no one could quite figure out, how converted the quantum stealth technology into what they called party lights. The ship's impenetrable shields now pulsed in rhythm to something called disco. But that was just the beginning. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the latest human advancement. They called it the Yeet Fleet. Yes, the translation matrices had struggled mightily with that one. A collection of ships that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of caffeinated children with access to spare parts and too much imagination. Their method of faster-than-light travel, Science Director Myra's voice, was filled with equal parts horror and fascination as she entered the observation deck. It's wrong," Kraz offered. "Impossible? An affront to physics itself?" "Yes," Myra exclaimed. "They're not so much bypassing space-time as they are punching it in the face." Thorn suggested helpfully. The humans had looked at conventional FTL theory, decided it was too complicated, and instead developed what they called momentum preservation displacement, or as one human scientist had apparently dubbed it, "Yet the ship's so hard that space gives up and moves out of the way." It shouldn't work. It couldn't work. The equations made advanced quantum physicists cry. But somehow, maddeningly, it did work. "We're receiving a transmission," Thorn announced suddenly. Well, you should probably see this for yourself." The holographic display shifted, showing a human face. Commander Pike of the Earth Defense Force, looking far too amused for someone who was supposedly making first official contact with an advanced alien civilization. "Hey there." Pike's grin was infectious, even across species. "So quick question, those giant invisible walls you folks put up around our solar system, the ones we weren't supposed to notice? Yeah, we're using them to test our new surfboard ships. Hope you don't mind. The quantum resonance makes for some really gnarly waves." Kraz's scales shifted through so many colors, they nearly crashed the display's color recognition system. You knew? All this time?" "Oh yeah," Pike laughed. "Found your observation post too. Nice tech, we borrowed some ideas, hope you don't mind. Really helped with our entertainment industry. Did you know we turned one of your quantum probability matrices into a dating app? It's really popular." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Science Director Myra quietly banging her crystalline head against a wall. "Look," he continued, his expression becoming slightly more serious. "We get it. You saw us as primitives who needed to be contained until we were ready. But here's the thing about humans. We don't really do ready. We do try it and see what happens. Sometimes it works, sometimes it explodes, but we always learn something. And what exactly did you learn from us? Kraz asked, dreading the answer. Pike's grin returned, wider than ever. Oh, all sorts of things. For example, we learned that your super advanced quantum communication network makes an amazing platform for streaming cat videos. Also, we may have accidentally figured out how to turn your containment field into a sort of space trampoline. The physics department is still arguing about how that works, but the space tourism industry is booming. At that moment, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Not warning alarms. These were different. These sounded almost festive. Oh yeah, Pike added casually, we're also throwing a party. In about 10 minutes, ships from Earth are going to pop up in every major system in the galaxy. Nothing hostile, just cultural exchange. We're calling it the Galactic Flash Mob. There'll be music, dancing, something we call karaoke, or color drain from Kraz's scales. You're going to cause mass panic. Nah, Pike waved dismissively. We already made contact with most species individually. Turns out, when you're not part of some stuffy council, people are a lot more fun to hang out with. The hive mind folks, amazing dance partners, all those arms. And the silicon consciousness. They make incredible DJs. As if on cue, thousands of human vessels appeared throughout the galaxy, each broadcasting what they called party invitations. The carefully maintained order of galactic civilization dissolved into what could only be described as the biggest party the universe had ever seen. The Grand Council, in an emergency session that would later be remembered as the Great Facepalm, finally had to admit what Admiral Kraz had been saying for 50 years. Humanity couldn't be contained, couldn't be controlled, and definitely couldn't be predicted. You know what the funniest part is? Kraz said later, watching Earth ships teaching Nexaran vessels how to crowd surf through an asteroid field. We spent all this time worried about their weapons, their expansion, their potential for violence, and instead, they conquered the galaxy with party planning and social media. Thorn finished, his scales simmering with mirth. Though Kraz added thoughtfully, we should probably warn them about the void creatures from Dimension X. You know, the ones even we're afraid of? At that moment, another transmission came through. It was Pike again. Okay, about those void creatures you guys are so worried about. Yeah, we met them last week. Turns out they're not hostile. They were just really, really lonely. We're teaching them something called TikTok dances. They're surprisingly good at it. Kraz and Thorn exchanged looks, their scales shifting to match a new emotion, one their species had never needed before. It roughly translated is of course they did, because that's what humans do. They come from the void, bringing chaos, innovation, and apparently an endless supply of party games. They don't follow the rules because they're too busy inventing new ones. They don't wait for the universe to make sense. They make it make sense on their own terms. And sometimes, just sometimes, their way works better than anyone could have imagined. As the galaxy erupted into what humans would call the biggest block party ever, Admiral Kraz finally allowed his scales to shift to a color of pure joy. Because sometimes, the best way to deal with an unstoppable force isn't to try to stop it. It's to join the party. After all, as humanity had proven, the void wasn't empty. It was just waiting for someone crazy enough to turn it into a dance floor.